Captain Derek Stone grabbed the little girl's ice cream cone and crushed it in his fist, right in front of her father, just to prove he could. The base fell silent. Every soldier within 20 feet looked away, because they knew the captain. They knew what happened to people who pushed back. But no one knew the janitor. No one knew what he'd buried, or who he used to be before he chose a mop over a gun. What happened next didn't just change Derek Stone's life. It ended a career, exposed a conspiracy, and forced the most powerful general on the Eastern Seaboard to make a phone call he never wanted to make. Drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button. You're going to want part 2. The thing about ghosts is they don't announce themselves. They move through halls without making noise. They show up early, leave late, and they never, under any circumstances, let anyone look them in the eye long enough to remember their face. Marcus Cole had been a ghost for 3 years, and he was good at it. Maybe the best. Fort Aldridge wasn't a glamorous posting. 70 miles from the nearest city worth mentioning, it sat at the edge of Virginia's flat, featureless western counties, like something the Pentagon had forgotten to decommission. The men and women stationed there were mostly young, mid-20s, early 30s, the kind of soldiers still hungry enough to believe the next assignment would be the one that mattered. They ran drills in the dust, complained about the food, and treated the maintenance staff the way men who carry rifles sometimes treat people who carry mops. Like furniture. Marcus didn't mind. That invisibility was the whole point. He arrived at 5:47 every morning, 12 minutes before his official shift started, because those 12 minutes were his. The base was quiet then. The hallways of the administrative buildings smelled like industrial cleaner and stale coffee, and Marcus moved through them with the kind of deliberate calm that most men spend their whole lives trying to fake. He was 41 years old, built lean and efficient, with hands that had done things he no longer permitted himself to think about. His hair had gone gray at the temples sometime in the last 2 years. He hadn't bothered to notice exactly when. His locker was at the far end of the maintenance wing, past the utility closets and the ancient boiler that groaned every morning like it was being asked to do something unreasonable. He kept it clean. A photo of Lily was taped to the inside of the door. She was 6 in the picture, gap-toothed and laughing, sitting on the hood of his truck somewhere in North Carolina. He'd taken the shot on a Sunday. He remembered that. He'd been genuinely happy that day, which was still something of a novelty at the time. He changed into his uniform, poured coffee from the thermos he brought from home, and started his rounds. This was his life. This was, deliberately and by careful design, his entire life. Lily was 8 now. She had her mother's eyes, dark brown, almost black, with that particular quality of attention that made people feel, when she looked at them, like she was reading something written just beneath their skin. Sarah had been like that. Marcus hadn't been able to look directly at his daughter for the first 6 months after the funeral, because every time he did, he saw Sarah looking back. He'd gotten past that, mostly. They lived 12 minutes from base in a 2-bedroom rental that cost less than it should have, which meant the landlord came by twice a year to fix things that were never quite right, and the heating ran loud in the winter. Marcus had patched the fence in the backyard himself, installed new locks on both exterior doors without being asked, and built Lily a reading shelf out of reclaimed wood that she'd immediately covered with construction paper drawings of horses. She didn't know yet that he'd done 3 tours in places that didn't appear on any map she'd ever seen in school. She didn't know that her father's particular skill set had once been considered a national security asset. She knew he made good pancakes, that he was always on time, and that he never, ever yelled. He had made her that promise after Sarah died. He had held her in that terrible hospital waiting room with the beige walls and the buzzing fluorescent light, and he had said, I will never lose my temper in front of you. Not ever. That's my promise. He'd kept it. Keeping it was getting harder. Fridays were the good days. Lily got out of school at 2:30, which was 15 minutes after Marcus clocked out. He'd swing by the elementary school in his truck, and she'd come running out with her backpack half unzipped and some catastrophically important piece of news about something that had happened at recess, or in art class, or at lunch, that simply could not wait until they reached the truck. He loved those drives. He held them in a separate, protected place inside him, away from everything else. The trouble started on a Friday. He'd just come off his shift, still in his maintenance uniform, hands still smelling faintly of cleaner. He was cutting through the east corridor of the administrative building, the shortcut that took 3 minutes off the walk to the parking lot, when he heard the voice. He recognized it before he saw the face. Captain Derek Stone had a voice designed by nature for humiliation. It was the kind of voice that was always slightly too loud for the space it occupied, always pitched just above conversational, always carrying the implication that whatever was being said for an audience. Marcus had heard it twice before. Once during a base-wide briefing he'd had no business attending, but had been sweeping the hall adjacent to. Once in the officers' mess, when Stone had sent back his food 3 times for reasons that reduced the kitchen staff to an anxious silence. Marcus had filed Stone away the way he filed everything away. Quietly. Completely. Without commentary. He filed people in 2 categories, those who required attention and those who didn't. Stone was in the first category. Marcus had known that from day one. He turned the corner and saw him. Stone was in full uniform, his cap under his arm, talking to a pair of junior enlisted who had the particular posture of people wishing very hard they were somewhere else. He was 28, maybe 29, with the kind of face that had probably gotten him things his entire life. Square jaw, easy smile, the confidence of a man who had never once been held accountable for anything. His father was General Raymond Stone. That fact traveled with Derek like a second shadow. Marcus clocked all of this in under 2 seconds. Then he started to walk past. "Hey!" He kept walking. "Hey, janitor!" Marcus stopped. He turned around slowly, the way he did everything slowly, and looked at Stone with an expression that revealed nothing. Stone was smiling. It wasn't a pleasant smile. "You walked through my conversation." "Sir," Marcus said, "I'm heading to the parking lot. I apologize for the interruption." "Did I say you could go?" The 2 junior enlisted were staring at the floor now, doing the thing soldiers learn early. Make yourself invisible. Marcus recognized the instinct. "I'll wait," Marcus said. Stone studied him for a moment. The smile shifted into something more performative. "You're the one who does E-Wing, right? Tuesday/Thursday rotation?" "Yes, sir." "I noticed the bathroom on the 3rd floor wasn't cleaned yesterday." "I was covering a shift in B-Wing, sir. There was a flooding incident that required—" "I don't need the explanation. I need the bathroom clean." "Yes, sir." Stone tilted his head. There was something in his eyes that Marcus recognized. The specific curiosity of a bully who has found something that doesn't react the way things usually do. The calm seemed to interest him, irritate him, like silence was a form of disrespect. "What's your name?" "Cole, sir. Marcus Cole." "How long have you been on base, Cole?" 3 years, sir." Stone looked at the 2 junior enlisted, then back at Marcus. 3 years, and still mopping floors." He let that sit for a moment. "Must not have many options." "No, sir." "Wife? Kids?" Marcus's jaw tightened. Just once. The only sign. "A daughter, sir. Single dad? Stone performed something like sympathy. That's rough. What happened to the mother? The corridor was very quiet. She passed, sir. Right. Stone nodded slowly, as if absorbing this tragic data. Well, that explains some things. Marcus looked at him, said nothing. Stone held his gaze for a beat, then smiled again and waved a hand dismissively. Go ahead, go pick up your kid. Marcus turned and walked to the parking lot. He did not walk faster than usual. He did not change his breathing. He drove to the school with the radio off, and when Lily came running out with her half-unzipped backpack, he smiled a real smile, and listened to 15 minutes of news about a disagreement between two girls over who got to name the class hamster. He did not tell her anything about Captain Stone. He tucked it away, let it sit. The following Friday was the one that changed everything. Marcus had been asked to cover a double. One of the other maintenance staff had called out sick, and the supervisor, a tired man named Gerald, who smelled permanently of cigarettes, and had long ago stopped caring about most things, had called Marcus at 6 a.m. because Marcus was, in Gerald's words, the only one who doesn't disappear when it gets hard. He'd agreed, which meant calling Lily's teacher, adjusting the pickup arrangement, and adding 3 hours to a shift that was already long. He didn't complain. He didn't have the luxury. He was finishing up in the East Wing around 4 p.m. when he heard his daughter's voice. That sentence doesn't fully communicate what it did to his nervous system. He had spent 3 years carefully, systematically separating these two worlds, the base and Lily. She had never been here. She had no reason to be here. The sound of her voice in this corridor was so contextually wrong that his brain required nearly 2 full seconds to process it. He came around the corner. Lily was standing in the hallway outside the East Wing entrance, backpack on, holding the small stuffed rabbit she still carried everywhere, despite being 8 and having decided she was too old for stuffed animals, on at least 4 separate occasions. The teacher's aide, a young woman named Priya, who sometimes helped with late pickups, was standing next to her, looking uncomfortable. Stone was there. He was standing between them and the exit. Not blocking them exactly, just present, occupying the space in the way men who understand the power of presence occupy space. He was looking at Lily with that tilted head curiosity he directed at Marcus the week before. Lily was looking back at him with the dark-eyed steadiness she'd inherited from her mother. "Dad!" Lily's face broke into relief when she saw Marcus. She moved toward him immediately. Marcus was already moving toward her. Stone watched the reunion with his arms crossed. "This her?" he said, to no one in particular. "Sir," Marcus addressed him quietly, keeping Lily close. "Is there something I can help you with?" "I was just talking to your daughter," Stone shrugged. "Priya here was a little turned around looking for you. I was helping." "I appreciate that." Marcus looked at Priya, who gave him a small, apologetic look that told him more than she probably intended. "We'll get out of your way." He started to steer Lily toward the exit. "She's got her mom's eyes," Stone said. Marcus stopped. "I saw a photo," Stone continued casually. "The one in your locker. Someone showed it to me. She was a pretty woman." Everything in Marcus went very still. "Was," Stone repeated, letting the word do its work. Marcus turned around. He positioned himself so that Lily was behind him, not between them. "Sir," he said. "You know, I looked you up, Cole." Stone unfolded his arms. His voice had dropped to a more private register. Not quiet, but controlled. "Just out of curiosity. You know what's interesting? There's almost nothing there. 3 years on base, no priors, no commendations, no complaints. I mean nothing. Like, you appeared out of nowhere." He smiled. "Most men who mop floors, they got a story. Bankruptcy, DUI, bad luck. You've got no story at all." I'm a private person, sir. Yeah, Stone studied him. That's interesting, too. There was a pause. Then Stone looked down at Lily, who was peering around Marcus's side. Hey, kid, he produced a genial smile. You want some coffee? I was just about to... She's 8, Marcus said flatly. Right, Stone laughed. He had a cup in his hand, Marcus realized, had been holding it the whole time. Styrofoam, base cafeteria, 3/4 full. He turned slightly, gesturing toward the exit with it in a way that seemed casual. The coffee came off the cup in an arc. It caught the front of Lily's dress. The sound Lily made wasn't a scream. It was smaller than that. A sharp intake of breath, then a single syllable. Oh, in a voice that was trying very hard to be brave and not quite managing it. The dress was pale yellow. It had been Sarah's favorite color. Marcus had bought it 2 weeks ago. He looked at his daughter. He looked at the spreading stain on the fabric, and at the way she was holding the rabbit tighter now, and at the expression on her face. Not crying, but fighting it. That particular expression children wear when they are trying very hard to be older than they are. He turned and looked at Captain Derek Stone. Stone was already beginning a sentence. Oh, man, I'm so sorry. That was... You stepped right into... Stop, Marcus said. The word was quiet. Just one syllable. But something in the way he said it. Some quality in his voice that had no anger in it. No heat. Nothing recognizable as ordinary human upset. Made Priya take a step back. Made the junior enlisted 20 feet down the corridor turn to look. Made Stone stop talking. Marcus crouched down. He pulled the small utility cloth from his back pocket and gently dabbed the front of Lily's dress, checking her hands, her arms. The coffee hadn't been hot enough to burn, thank God. But he checked anyway, methodically, without rushing. He looked her in the eyes. You okay? She nodded. She was still fighting the expression. Proud of you, he said quietly. Wait by the door. 2 minutes. She went. Marcus stood up. He looked at Derek Stone. Stone was already repositioning into his default posture. The slightly too wide stance, the easy smile coming back. The whole apparatus of invulnerability reassembling itself. Cole, come on. It was an accident. Was it? I said it was an accident. Okay. You're not going to... Stone stopped. Something in Marcus's complete absence of readable emotion seemed to be confusing him. What are you doing? I'm looking at you, Marcus said. I'm trying to decide something. Decide what? A long pause. Whether you're stupid or just reckless. The corridor was very quiet now. Stone's expression shifted. The smile dropped by exactly half. Watch your mouth, Cole. I'm not going to file a report. Marcus's voice was calm, precise, like a man reading off a checklist. It won't go anywhere. Your father commands this installation, and everyone who works here knows what that means. Complaints about you disappear. I know that because I've seen it happen twice in 3 years. He paused. So, I'm not going to file anything. Good, Stone said. I want to tell you something instead. Cole, I want to tell you one thing, and then I'm going to take my daughter home. Marcus took one step closer. Not aggressively. Just close enough that this was now a private conversation. I spent 9 years cleaning up messes for men who thought they were untouchable. Not floors, Captain. Not toilets. Different kinds of messes. The kind men like your father commissioned, and men like me executed and then disappeared afterward. Because that's how those things work. Stone's jaw tightened. I don't know what you're... You don't, Marcus agreed. You don't know what I am. You looked me up and found nothing, and you thought that meant I was nobody. He held Stone's gaze. It means the opposite. It means people who are very good at very specific things made sure there was nothing to find. Because men who can be found can be threatened, and I was too useful to be threatened. A long silence. Stone's posture had changed. Subtle, but present. The stance was a little less wide. "I don't respond to coffee on my daughter's dress with a report," Marcus said. "I respond with patience, with memory, and with the understanding that in a world where powerful men believe they can do anything," his voice never wavered, "somebody has to remember everything." He held Stone's eyes for 3 more seconds. Then he turned, walked to the exit where Lily was waiting with her rabbit and her ruined yellow dress, took her hand, and led her to the parking lot. He buckled her in. He drove out of the gate. He'd gone about 4 miles when Lily said quietly, "Dad?" "Yeah, Bug?" "Who was that man?" Marcus watched the road. "Nobody," he said. "Just somebody who doesn't know better yet."
"Oh."
A pause.
"Are you mad?"
He thought about it. He ran a careful, practiced assessment of everything inside him. The controlled inventory he'd learned to perform in circumstances that required him to know exactly what he was carrying. "No," he said. And it was true. He wasn't mad. He was something much quieter and much more dangerous than mad. He was remembering. That night, after Lily was asleep, Marcus sat at the kitchen table with a glass of water and a laptop that he hadn't opened in 3 years. He opened it. He typed a name, General Raymond Stone. He already knew what was there. He had known for 3 years. He had walked away from it deliberately, the way you walk away from a loaded weapon you've decided not to use, placing it carefully on a shelf and leaving the room. He looked at the files, the dates, the names attached to specific operations that would never appear in any congressional record. He thought about Lily's dress. He thought about her face, that particular expression. He thought about Sarah, who had worn yellow because she said it was the color of something worth keeping. He closed the laptop. He sat in the dark kitchen for a long time. Then he picked up his phone and opened a contact he had not touched since the day he'd changed his life. He didn't dial it. Not yet. But he opened it. And he looked at the name. Admiral James Harrow, Phoenix 9. The mop and the mission. The ghost and the father. The man Marcus Cole had buried was starting to remember he was still alive. He didn't sleep that night. Not because he couldn't. Marcus Cole had learned to sleep in places that would have kept most men awake for a week. He'd learned to sleep in the back of moving vehicles in hostile territory, in 40-minute increments, with one ear always partially open. Sleep was a discipline, not a comfort, and he was good at it. He didn't sleep because he made a choice not to. Because sleep would have meant setting down what he was carrying, and he wasn't ready to do that yet. He needed to sit with it. He needed to understand exactly what had shifted inside him when that coffee hit Lily's dress, and whether what he was feeling was a reaction or a decision. There was a difference. He'd spent years learning the difference. A reaction was adrenaline. A reaction was the hands tightening and the jaw setting and the old operational instincts snapping to attention like soldiers at the sound of a name they hadn't heard in years. A reaction was dangerous because reactions belonged to the man he used to be, and that man had no business being around an 8-year-old girl. A decision was something else. A decision was cold and deliberate and arrived at through a process, not a feeling. A decision meant you had looked at all available information, mapped all probable outcomes, and chosen a course of action with your eyes completely open. Marcus sat at the kitchen table until 4 in the morning, deciding which one this was. By the time the sky outside started turning gray, he had his answer. He closed the laptop without opening it again, put his phone back on the counter, and went to wake up his daughter. Lily was already half awake when he pushed her door open, which wasn't unusual. She slept light, like him, She was lying on her back, with the rabbit on her chest and one arm thrown over her eyes, and she said, without moving, "Is it a school day?" "Yeah." "Okay." She didn't move. "Lil, I'm up." "You're not up. I'm mentally up." He sat on the edge of her bed, and she lowered her arm and looked at him. Those eyes. He had learned, over 3 years, to look back directly, to let her see him looking. "How's the dress?" he asked. She thought about it. "It'll probably come out. Miss Patterson says club soda gets anything out." Miss Patterson's right about most things. She also says that breakfast burritos are a cultural institution, so... Lily sat up and pulled the rabbit into her lap. "Dad, was that man in trouble? The one with the coffee?" "Why do you ask that?" "Because of the way you talked to him." She looked at the rabbit's ear, which she'd been worrying with one thumb since she was 4. "You talk to me different than you talk to most people, but you talk to him like..." She paused, searching. "Like how you talk to things that might break." Marcus looked at his daughter for a long moment. "Go brush your teeth," he said. She went, but at the door she stopped and turned back. "Dad?" "Yeah?" "You don't have to tell me, but I'm not scared of the truth." She held his gaze with her mother's eyes, completely steady. "I just want you to know that." She went to the bathroom. He heard the water run. He stayed on the edge of her bed in the gray morning light and thought about what she'd said. "I'm not scared of the truth." She was 8 years old. He didn't know whether to be proud of that or terrified by it. He decided on both. The weekend passed quietly, which was what he needed it to do. He took Lily to the library on Saturday morning, and she spent 2 hours working through a stack of books about horses with the kind of focused intensity that reminded him of mission briefings. He sat across from her with his coffee and watched her read and let himself be, for those 2 hours, just a man in a library with his daughter. Sunday he fixed the loose board on the back porch that had been bothering him for 2 weeks. Lily sat on the steps and provided commentary on his technique. He did not check the laptop. He did not look at the phone. He mowed half the lawn before the mower ran out of fuel, swore under his breath, and Lily, who had been watching from the porch, said, "Dad, I heard that," with such perfect composure that he laughed for the first time in what felt like a month. By Sunday night, he had made peace with the fact that Monday would be different. Because Derek Stone wouldn't leave it alone. Marcus knew that the way he knew certain things, not from evidence, but from pattern recognition, from years of studying how men like Stone operated. The confrontation in the corridor hadn't satisfied Stone. It had irritated him. A man like Derek Stone could absorb disrespect from another officer, could metabolize embarrassment in a context he understood, because the rules of that world were familiar and the remedies were established. You pushed back. You escalated. You invoked rank. What Stone couldn't absorb was the feeling he'd gotten in that corridor, that stillness, that absence of fear. A janitor who looked at him without flinching, who spoke to him in complete sentences, who walked away. That would be eating at Stone. Marcus was certain of it. And certain men, when something eats at them, have only one way of responding. He was right. Monday morning he arrived at base at 5:47 and found a written disciplinary notice taped to his locker. 3 complaints had been filed, all on Friday afternoon. Bathroom E3, inadequately sanitized. Corridor E7, left with a wet floor hazard unmarked. Maintenance equipment left unsecured in a common area. Marcus read the notice carefully, then folded it and put it in his pocket. Gerald, his supervisor, was in his office nursing his first cigarette of the day, with the window cracked an inch. He looked up when Marcus knocked, and something in his face shifted. "You saw it," Gerald said. "I saw it." "Look, Marcus." Gerald set down the cigarette. He was a tired man, but he wasn't a dishonest one, and that had always been the thing Marcus respected about him. "I don't know what happened Friday, and I'm not asking. But those complaints came from upstairs. You understand what I'm telling you? They came from upstairs specifically, with a note attached that mentioned your name." "Yes, sir." "I'm required to log them. I can't make them go away." "I understand." Gerald looked at him for a moment. "You going to be okay?" "I'm always okay." "That's not actually what I asked, but—" Gerald picked up his cigarette. "Just keep your head down this week, please, as a personal favor." Marcus nodded and went to start his rounds. He kept his head down. He did his job with the same quiet precision he always brought to it, covered every inch of his assigned corridors, left every surface cleaner than he'd found it. He was invisible and efficient, and gave no one anything to file. He was a ghost. But on Tuesday afternoon, Stone found him anyway. Marcus was in the utility room on the second floor of the administrative building, replacing a section of broken shelf bracket when the door opened. He knew before he turned around. Stone came in without knocking and closed the door behind him with a particular kind of care. The deliberate, controlled sound of a man who wants you to know he's the one deciding how loud things get. "Cole." Marcus kept his hands on the bracket. "Captain? You filed anything?" "No, sir." Stone was quiet for a moment. Marcus could hear him processing that. "You should have been more careful, Friday. Left equipment in the corridor." "Noted, sir." 2 more complaints this week, and you're on administrative review. 3, and you're terminated." "I understand the policy." A pause. "You don't seem concerned." Marcus finished tightening the bracket, set down the screwdriver, and turned around. He leaned against the shelf with his arms crossed, unhurried. Stone was in the doorway, cap in hand, and his face had that same quality from the corridor. That specific curiosity of a man who keeps poking at something that won't respond the way it should. "Captain," Marcus said, "can I ask you something?" Stone blinked. That clearly wasn't what he'd expected. "What?" "Why?" "Why what?" "Why this?" Marcus gestured vaguely at the air between them. "I'm a janitor. I'm not a problem. I don't talk about anything. I don't complain about anything. I don't file anything. I do my job. I pick up my daughter. I go home." He looked at Stone directly. "So what is it that's bothering you enough about me specifically that you've spent a week of your time on this?" Stone's jaw tightened. "I don't like your attitude." "I don't have an attitude." "You've got a mouth." "When spoken to." Marcus nodded once. "Sir." The sir landed the way Marcus intended it to, exactly 1 layer below the surface of insubordination, in the place where men like Stone couldn't get purchase on it. Stone stepped into the room. "Let me explain something to you. My father built this installation. He has run it for 11 years. He has 22 years of distinguished service and the ear of people in this government who matter. Which means," he stopped 2 feet from Marcus, "that I can make your life on this base very, very difficult." "You already have, sir." "This is just the beginning." Marcus held his gaze. "Okay." "Okay?" Stone repeated. "What would you like me to say?" Another long pause. Stone's eyes moved over Marcus's face, looking for something. The crack, the flinch, the small tell that every person eventually shows. He didn't find it. Marcus had spent years building a face that revealed nothing on command, and it was the one skill from his previous life that had transferred seamlessly into this one. "You think you're untouchable," Stone said. "No, sir." Marcus's voice was quiet and even. "I think I'm a man who already lost the most important thing in his life, which means I'm not afraid of anything you can file against me." He paused. "That's a different thing from untouchable." Stone held the stare. Then something changed in his eyes. Not retreat, not that. Something more like recalculation. "You were military," Stone said, not a question. "No," Marcus said. "You were something." "I'm maintenance, Captain. Men don't talk like you unless they've been trained." Marcus said nothing. Stone pointed a finger. "I'm going to find out what you were. I have access to records you don't know about." "I know about every record that exists on me," Marcus said calmly. "You won't find much." Stone stared at him for one more second, then turned and left without another word. Marcus stood in the utility room alone, listening to the footsteps recede down the hall. Then he uncrossed his arms and looked down at his hands. They were completely steady. He appreciated that. There had been a period, years ago, when that steadiness had been the thing he was most grateful for. Now it just felt like furniture. He picked up his screwdriver. But that night, sitting at the kitchen table after Lily went to sleep, he opened the laptop again. And this time, he went further. There were things in those files that Marcus had never told anyone. Not Gerald, not the therapist he'd seen twice after Sarah died, before deciding that particular exercise wasn't working for him. Not even Sarah herself, in the years before she got sick, and in the years while she was. Some things you carry alone, because the alternative is sharing the weight. And sharing the weight means making other people responsible for knowing. And people who know things can be used. He had learned that lesson before he was 30. He had been, in the language of the organization he'd worked for, what was called a Tier 1 resolvent. The title was bureaucratic and deliberately opaque, which was the point. What it meant in practical terms was that when situations became too complicated for conventional military or intelligence solutions, when the web of political exposure made direct action impossible through normal channels, men like Marcus were called in to resolve the situation cleanly and completely, and without record. He had been very good at this. He had also, by the time he was 37, decided that being good at something didn't make it worth doing. That particular epiphany had arrived over several months, accelerating toward the end as Sarah got sicker, and it became harder and harder to sit next to her hospital bed, after debriefing from the kind of work he did, and feel like he was still a person she deserved to have there. He had resigned the way you resign from an organization that doesn't officially exist, quietly, with the understanding on both sides that certain things would never be spoken of, and with the additional understanding, never stated, always implied, that the men he had worked for retained the right to recall him if circumstances required it. He had rebuilt his life around the certainty that they never would. That certainty was beginning to feel naive, because the files Marcus was looking at now weren't just about Raymond Stone's career. They were about a series of decisions made during a specific 18-month window, roughly 8 years ago, in which a senior officer, whose name appeared on orders that would never survive congressional review, had authorized a series of operations in 3 separate countries that had resulted in civilian casualties, covered up intelligence failures, and the wrongful imprisonment of a foreign national who had been an American intelligence asset. Marcus knew these files because he had been there. Not for all of it, but for enough. And he knew them because he had copied them, quietly and precisely, the same week he resigned. Insurance. The kind of insurance you take out when the people on the other side of the table know where your daughter goes to school. Raymond Stone's name was in those files 16 times. Marcus had never used them. He had no desire to use them. He had wanted, very simply, to be left alone. And for 3 years that arrangement had held. He pulled up a second window on the laptop and looked at the contact again. Admiral James Harrow, Phoenix 9. Harrow was 71 now, retired 3 years, living somewhere on the Eastern Shore. He and Marcus had worked together twice, once directly, once at a remove. And Harrow was one of 4 people on Earth who knew Marcus Cole's actual professional history. He was also a man of the specific and particular kind of integrity that existed at the top of certain organizations. The kind that had bent many times and broken none, and that came with a very clear understanding of where lines were drawn. Marcus hadn't spoken to Harrow since his resignation call. A 5-minute conversation. Professional. Conclusive. Harrow had said, at the end of it, "If you ever need me, and the reason is real, you know how to reach me." Marcus stared at the number for a long time. Then he closed the contact screen and went to bed. Because he wasn't there yet. He needed to be certain about what he was choosing before he made a move that couldn't be unmade. That was the discipline. That was what separated a decision from a reaction. He slept 4 hours, dreamless, efficient. And in the morning, Lily came into the kitchen in her socks and her too big sweatshirt and announced that she decided she wanted to learn to play guitar. "Why guitar?" Marcus asked, making her eggs. "Because," she said, climbing onto her chair with a kind of decisive dignity, "it seems like the kind of thing where, if you're sad, you can make it sound good anyway." Marcus set the pan down. He turned and looked at his daughter. "Yeah," he said after a moment. "That's exactly right." She beamed and picked up her fork. He stood there for a second longer than was strictly necessary, watching her, memorizing the moment with the same practiced thoroughness he'd once applied to tactical maps. Then he turned back to the stove. He had a plan. The shape of it was coming together in the back of his mind, the way plans always did with him. Not in a rush, but steadily, each piece finding its position. Stone wanted to find out what Marcus was. Fine. Marcus would show him. Not everything, not yet. Just enough to make him understand that the thing he'd poked at in the utility room was considerably larger than what he could see from where he was standing. Wednesday afternoon, Marcus requested a meeting with the base HR coordinator, a woman named Carol Ennis, who had been doing the job for 14 years and had the specific kind of institutional memory that made her dangerous to anyone trying to abuse documented processes. He walked in, sat down across from her desk, and laid out a quiet, complete, meticulously organized account of every interaction he'd had with Captain Stone over the preceding 12 days. No emotion, no editorializing. Dates, times, locations, exact language quoted where memory was precise. The disciplinary notices filed without prior warning or direct complaint. The utility room visit. And, because Marcus understood leverage, the moment in the corridor where Stone had mentioned Sarah. Carol Ennis listened to all of it without interrupting. She had a notepad on her desk, and she wrote on it. When he finished, she set down her pen. "Mr. Cole," she looked at him over the rim of her glasses, "I want to be honest with you about something. Please." The Stone family has significant influence over how certain things are handled on this installation. She said it the way people say true things they're tired of pretending aren't true. Which means that a formal complaint from you against Captain Stone will face specific obstacles that a complaint against anyone else might not. I understand. What I can do, she continued, is document this conversation. That documentation becomes part of a file that exists independently of the standard complaint process. If anything else happens, she paused. If patterns emerge, that file can be used in ways the standard process can't. That's all I need, Marcus said. She studied him. You're very calm about all of this. Yes, ma'am. Most people in your situation would be angrier. I'm not most people in my situation. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she picked up her pen again and wrote something on the notepad. I'll process this today, she said. He thanked her and left. He was in the parking lot, walking to his truck, when his phone buzzed. Unknown number. He looked at it, let it ring twice, then picked up. Silence on the other end for a moment. Then a voice he recognized immediately. 3 years or no 3 years. The kind of voice that sounds like it was built in a particular kind of room. The voice of a man who has spent decades saying important things quietly. Someone told me you might be having a complicated week, Admiral James Harrow said. Marcus stopped walking. Who told you that? He asked. I still have a few ears. I haven't called you. No, Harrow said. You haven't. A pause. But you opened my contact 4 times in the last 6 days. I can tell when that happens. Another pause. I set that up after you resigned, in case you needed a nudge. Marcus was quiet for a moment, looking at the parking lot, at the cars and the ordinary mundane reality of a Tuesday afternoon at an undistinguished military installation in Western Virginia. Raymond Stone, he said. Harrow's voice changed by a fraction. Not much, but Marcus was trained to hear fractions. His son bother your family? His son bothered my daughter. A silence that was not empty. Well, Harrow said finally, and there was something in his voice that might, in another context, have been described as quiet fury. That's a word I didn't expect to hear in this context, but I can't say I'm surprised. He exhaled. Tell me what you need, Marcus. Marcus stood in the parking lot of Fort Aldridge and looked at the horizon for a long moment. Not yet, he said. I need to know if Stone comes at me again first. And if he does? Then I'll call you back. And you won't wait 4 days to do it this time. No, Marcus said. I won't. He hung up. He got in his truck. He sat there for a full minute before starting the engine. Harrow had been watching. That meant other people might be watching too. That changed the geometry. That meant Marcus wasn't just managing a local problem anymore. He was sitting at the edge of something much older and much larger. And the question was not whether Derek Stone was going to push again. The question was what happened when he did. Marcus started the truck and drove to pick up his daughter. She came out of school holding a library book about the history of the guitar, which she had apparently checked out approximately 30 minutes after their conversation that morning. He took it from her and looked at the cover. Fast mover, he said. I know what I want, she said simply, climbing into the truck. He looked at the book, then at her. Yeah, he thought. She does. He put the truck in gear and pulled out of the school parking lot, watching the rear-view mirror the way he always watched mirrors, out of habit, out of 3 years of practiced vigilance, out of a deep and abiding understanding that the world his daughter believed was safe was only safe because someone was paying very close attention. The truck behind him was new, dark blue. He'd seen it once before, near the base. He noted it, filed it, kept driving. He was almost certain it was nothing. He was not yet completely certain. And in Marcus Cole's experience, almost certain was exactly the distance between coming home and not coming home at all. The dark blue truck was there again Thursday morning. Marcus clocked it at 6:14, pulling into the base parking lot 3 cars behind him. Same model, same color, different plates than the day before. That last detail was the one that mattered. Different plates meant someone was being careful. Someone being careful meant this wasn't Derek Stone. Stone wasn't careful. Stone was a man who used his last name the way other men used armor, loud and obvious. This was something else, something older. Marcus parked, went inside, started his rounds. He didn't change anything about his routine. Changing your routine told people they'd been seen, and telling people they'd been seen cost you the one advantage you had over them: the fact that they didn't know what you knew. So he mopped his floors and cleaned his bathrooms and replaced 3 burned-out light bulbs in the B-wing corridor. And he let the information sit in the back of his mind, where it would be useful when he needed it. At 9:15, his phone buzzed. A text from an unsaved number he recognized immediately as one of Harrow's secondary lines. "They're running your financials. Somebody put in a request through a civilian contractor channel." Came from inside the installation. Marcus read it twice, then slipped the phone back in his pocket and kept walking. So Stone had gone looking. That was faster than Marcus had expected, which meant Stone was more rattled than he'd appeared in the utility room. Rattled men move quickly and sloppily, and quickly and sloppily was exactly how men like Derek Stone made mistakes they couldn't recover from. The financials would give them nothing. Marcus's financial life was clean, deliberately, architecturally clean. He'd spent the first 6 months after resigning making sure of that, with the help of a man who had since retired to Costa Rica and whose name Marcus would never say out loud again. His income was traceable, his expenses were ordinary, and there was absolutely nothing that connected the bank account of Marcus Cole, maintenance employee, to anything that had happened in any of the 3 countries whose borders he had crossed without official sanction. But the fact that Stone was running his financials meant Stone was afraid. And afraid men, in Marcus's experience, either backed down or escalated. By Thursday afternoon, he had his answer. Gerald called him into the office at 3:30, with the look of a man who has been handed something he doesn't want to touch. "Sit down," Gerald said. Marcus sat. Gerald put a form on the desk between them. "Formal performance review, initiated by a request from the Senior Officers Division." He didn't look at Marcus when he said the next part. "It's been fast-tracked. Normally this process takes 3 weeks minimum. This one has a completion date of next Friday." "That's 8 days." "Yeah." Gerald finally looked up. "Marcus, I want you to understand that I am in no way initiating this. I was handed it this morning with instructions to process it." "I know that, Gerald." "If the review doesn't meet the performance threshold, the next step is termination proceedings." He said it like a man reading a sentence he wishes he could unread. "I'm required to tell you that." Marcus nodded. "Is there anything I can do?" Gerald asked. "Keep documenting," Marcus said. "Everything that comes across your desk that has my name on it. Date it, time it. Keep copies somewhere that isn't your office computer." Gerald stared at him. "You think this goes somewhere bad?" "I think it's already there." Gerald was quiet for a moment. He looked like a man who had spent a long career successfully avoiding exactly this kind of situation, and had arrived here anyway. "You're not what you look like, are you?" he said. Not quite a question. "I'm exactly what I look like," Marcus said. "A man who does his job well and takes care of his daughter." He stood up. "The rest is noise." He went back to work. But that evening, for the first time in 3 years, he didn't go straight from the base to Lily's school. He went 20 minutes out of his way, doubling back twice along routes that have no practical reason for existing in a commute. And when he was completely certain the dark blue truck was not behind him, he drove to the school, picked up Lily, and took the long way home. Lily was reading her guitar book in the passenger seat and didn't notice. He was glad. That night, she asked him if everything was okay. He was washing dishes. She was at the table doing homework, and he had his back to her, which was maybe why she asked. The same way some conversations are easier in the dark, some questions are easier when you're not looking directly at the person you're asking. "Why?" he said. "You're quiet in a different way." He turned off the water. "I'm always quiet." "Yeah, but different quiet." She put her pencil down. "You know how sometimes something is quiet because it's empty, and sometimes it's quiet because it's too full?" He dried his hands and turned around. She was looking at him with the frank, unarmored directness that she deployed sometimes with such precision that it stopped him cold. 8 years old, the most emotionally intelligent person he had ever personally known. "I'm handling something," he said. "At work?" "Yes." "Is it the man from last week?" He considered lines. He did that sometimes, not frequently, and never about anything that mattered. But sometimes the instinct was there, the old reflex of containment. He pushed it aside. "Yes," he said. Lily absorbed this. "Is he going to do something to you?" "He's trying to." "Can he?" "Not in the way he thinks." She was quiet for a moment, thinking it through with that methodical patience she had. Then she said, "Dad, you were something before. Before us. Before this." It wasn't a question. She'd never asked this directly before, and he'd never offered it, and for a moment the kitchen felt very still. "Yeah," he said. "I was." "Was it dangerous?" "Sometimes." "Are you still—" She stopped, started again. "Are you still that person?" Marcus pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. He put his elbows on the table, which he normally didn't do, and looked at his daughter directly. "The things I learned," he said, "don't go away. They're still there, but I choose every single day what I do with them. I choose you." He held her gaze. "That doesn't change, no matter what happens with this man or anyone else." Lily looked at him for a long moment. "Okay," she said. "Okay?" "I believe you." She picked up her pencil. "You should probably call whoever it is you've been thinking about calling." He blinked. "What makes you think I've been thinking about calling someone?" She gave him a look that was, with almost painful precision, the exact look Sarah used to give him when he asked an obvious question. "Dad, you've picked up your phone and put it down again like 9 times in the last 4 days." She returned to her homework. "Just call them." He looked at his daughter for a moment. Then he went to the other room and called Harrow. It rang twice. "I was expecting this call yesterday," Harrow said. "I was making a decision." "And?" "I need you to make contact with Stone. Not the son. The general." A pause. "That's a significant move." "Yes. Once I reach out to Raymond Stone, he knows you have protection from above his level. That escalates the situation before it resolves it." "I know," Marcus said. "But they're running my financials. They fast-tracked a fraudulent performance review, and I have a tail that's been on me since Tuesday. This isn't Stone's son improvising anymore. Raymond Stone is involved now, which means the window where this stays quiet is closing." Harrow was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice had shifted into the register Marcus remembered from operational briefings. Calm, precise, fully loaded. "What do you want me to say to him?" "Tell him I have the files." Silence. "You still have them," Harrow said. Not a question. "I never didn't have them." "Marcus," Harrow's voice was careful. Those files represent 8 years of Raymond Stone's career. If he knows you have them and are willing to use them, I'm not willing to use them, Marcus said. That's what you tell him. I'm not willing to use them as long as his son backs off. The performance review disappears, and my daughter and I are left completely alone. He paused. Tell him I want to be a ghost again. Tell him that's all I have ever wanted. Another silence, longer this time. He won't take that well, Harrow said. Men like Raymond Stone don't respond well to the word unless. No, Marcus agreed. But they understand the word evidence, and they understand consequences. And Raymond Stone is 3 years from a very comfortable retirement with a very long list of honors that he will lose entirely if anyone looks too carefully at an 18-month window 8 years ago. Marcus kept his voice level. He has too much to lose to call my bluff. And it isn't a bluff. Harrow exhaled quietly. Give me 24 hours. I'll give you 48. But, James. Marcus used the first name deliberately, which he almost never did. My daughter goes to a school 12 minutes from that base. If I see that blue truck within 2 miles of that school, I won't need 24 hours, and I won't be making a phone call. Understood, Harrow said, and the word was grave and complete. Marcus hung up. He sat in the quiet of the living room for a minute. Through the wall he could hear Lily at the table, the small sound of her pencil, the occasional rustle of a page, the ordinary, irreplaceable sound of his daughter doing homework. He had drawn a line in the sand. He knew that Raymond Stone would not take that quietly. He knew that before Harrow even made contact, Stone would move again, because that was what men who had spent decades operating in the dark did when they felt the light coming. They moved first, fast and hard, and without finesse, because finesse was what you had when you had time, and suddenly nobody had time. He was right about that, too. The Friday morning came in cold and gray. Marcus arrived at base at 5:47, the same as always, went to his locker, changed, and was halfway through his first corridor when Gerald appeared at the far end of the hall, walking with the specific tightness of a man carrying bad news he hasn't figured out how to say yet. Marcus, he stopped. Don't clock in. Gerald, they suspended your access. This morning, 40 minutes ago, I got a call from HR. Gerald held up a hand before Marcus could speak. It's listed as precautionary suspension, pending performance review outcome, which means technically you are still employed. Technically. Marcus looked at him. They're trying to get you off base, Gerald said quietly. Keep you from being here while whatever they're building against you gets built. He lowered his voice further. Carol Ennis called me this morning, off the record. She said the file she created from your meeting with her earlier this week was flagged for review by a senior administrator. She said she's never had that happen before in 14 years. Is she okay? Gerald blinked. She asked me to ask you the same thing, actually. Marcus was quiet for a moment, looking down the empty corridor at the mop he'd leaned against the wall when Gerald appeared. He looked at it for a second. The mop, the bucket, the small, ordinary tools of the life he had chosen. And then he pulled out his phone. Gerald, he said, you didn't see me in this hallway this morning. Gerald looked at him for a long moment. Then he turned around and walked back toward his office without another word. Marcus dialed. Harrow picked up on the first ring, which meant he was already awake, which meant he hadn't slept much either. They suspended me from base this morning, Marcus said. That means they want me removed from access to any witnesses before the review concludes, which means the review is a pretext for termination, which is the pretext for removing my employment-based housing authorization, which means Lily's school enrollment gets affected, Harrow said immediately, and the quickness of it told Marcus that Harrow had already mapped the board. They go after the daughter indirectly, through the administrative. Yes. That's Raymond Stone, Harrow said. Derek didn't think of that. The father did. A pause. I haven't made contact yet. I was going to this morning. Make it now. Marcus, if I call him right now, before he expects it, before he's prepared, he may react in a way that accelerates things rather than... James. Marcus's voice dropped to its quietest register, the one that in a different life had communicated the end of a negotiation and the beginning of something else entirely. He already accelerated it. I need you to call him right now and tell him that the next move he makes against my daughter's stability, school, home, anything, means the files go to 3 separate journalists simultaneously, with full documentation of the chain of evidence. He paused. Tell him I have redundancies. Tell him the files exist in places that don't require me to personally activate them. Silence on the line. Do you? Harrow asked. Have redundancies? He doesn't know that I don't. Another silence. All right, Harrow said. I'll call him now. One more thing. What? When you call him, Marcus said, use the call sign. A very specific silence. Marcus, use it. I need him to know exactly who he's dealing with. I need him to understand that this isn't a maintenance worker with a grudge. I need him to understand... He stopped, composed himself. I need him to understand that the man his son has been poking at in that corridor is the same man who spent 9 years being the last phone call that people like Raymond Stone ever wanted to receive. His voice was quiet and absolute. Use the call sign. Harrow exhaled. Phoenix 9, he said. All right. Marcus hung up. He stood in the empty corridor of Fort Aldridge for one long moment. The mop was still leaning against the wall. The bucket. The whole quiet apparatus of the life he'd chosen. He picked up the mop. He finished the corridor. Because that was what he did. He finished what he started. He did the job completely. And he left things cleaner than he found them. That had been true in his old life, and it was true in this one. And the fact that both sentences meant very different things was something he had made his peace with a long time ago. He turned in his badge at the security desk at 7:30, as instructed. The young corporal behind the desk wouldn't meet his eyes, which told Marcus the corporal knew it was wrong and didn't know what to do about that. Thank you, sir, Marcus said to the corporal. The corporal looked up, surprised by the courtesy. Yes, sir, he said back, and seemed to mean it. Marcus walked out into the gray morning and got in his truck. He sat there. His phone was in his hand. He was thinking about Lily, specifically about the way she'd looked at him across the kitchen table the night before. I believe you. Just like that. No conditions, no hesitation, no visible calculation. Pure and absolute. He thought about what she'd said about the guitar. If you're sad, you can make it sound good anyway. He thought about Sarah, who had worn yellow because it was the color of something worth keeping. He was not a man who cried easily or often. He had cried exactly 3 times as an adult. The day Sarah was diagnosed, the day she died, and one night, about 6 months afterward, sitting on the floor of Lily's room while she slept, when it had occurred to him with the force of a physical blow that she was going to grow up and he was going to have to figure out how to be worth growing up around. He didn't cry now, but he sat with the weight of it for a full minute, hands on the steering wheel, watching the gray sky above Fort Aldridge, and let himself feel the full measure of what was at stake. Then he put the truck in gear. He had a daughter to look after, and a phone call to wait for. And in his experience, the most dangerous part of any operation was never the confrontation itself. It was the silence just before you found out whether it had worked. The call came at 11:47 that same morning. Not from Harrow. From a number Marcus didn't recognize, with a Virginia area code and the specific quality of silence in the first half-second that told him, before a single word was spoken, that the man on the other end had spent a long career deciding how other people's lives went. "Mr. Cole." The voice was deep, controlled, and carrying underneath its professional surface a current of something that wasn't quite anger and wasn't quite fear, but lived in the territory between the two. "This is General Raymond Stone." Marcus was sitting at his kitchen table. He had made coffee. He had Lily's guitar book in front of him, open to a page about chord progressions, and he had been reading it without retaining a single word. "General," he said, "I think we should talk." "I think so too." A pause. "Admiral Harrow reached out to me this morning. I want you to know that whatever he told you about my willingness to—" "Sir," Marcus said quietly, "I'm going to stop you there." Silence. "I know how this conversation is supposed to go," Marcus continued. "You're going to tell me that Harrow overstated your exposure. You're going to tell me that the files I have are incomplete or miscontextualized, or that they represent decisions made under conditions that any reasonable review board would consider defensible. And then you're going to suggest, very carefully, that a man in my position, suspended, under review, living on a maintenance salary, has a great deal more to lose from a prolonged conflict with your office than you do." He paused. "Does that sound about right?" Another silence, longer. "You're not what my son described," Stone said. "No, sir, I'm not." "He said you're a janitor with a chip on his shoulder." "I am a janitor," Marcus said. "The rest is a matter of perspective." Stone made a sound that might have been a short, involuntary acknowledgement of something. It lasted less than a second. "What exactly do you want, Mr. Cole?" "I already told Admiral Harrow. I want to be left alone. I want the suspension reversed, the performance review closed, and the investigative surveillance on my vehicle terminated by end of business today." "That's a very specific list." "I'm a specific person." "And in exchange?" Stone's voice had shifted. The surface professionalism was still there, but underneath it now was the voice of a man conducting a negotiation he hadn't expected to be conducting. "You keep the files private." "The files stay where they are," Marcus said, "which is in multiple locations, in formats that don't require my personal involvement to be activated. I want to be very clear about that, General. This isn't a handshake agreement where one party disappears and the other party no longer has a problem. The files are independent of me. If anything happens to my employment, my housing, my daughter's school enrollment, or to me personally, those files begin moving on their own." The silence this time was different. It had weight in it. "You built a dead man's switch," Stone said. "I built a life," Marcus said. "The switch is just what happens if someone tries to take it from me." Stone was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, something had changed in his voice. Not softness exactly, but a kind of acknowledgement that Marcus recognized. The sound of a man who has run the calculations and arrived at a number he doesn't like. "My son acted badly," Stone said. It cost him something to say it. Marcus could hear that. "Yes, sir, he did. He's young. He has his mother's temper and my title, and not enough experience to understand that combination is dangerous. With respect, General, he's not that young. And the title is yours. The consequences of how he uses it are yours too." Another pause. "The suspension will be reversed today," Stone said. "The review will be closed as inconclusive, which is the cleanest outcome available without raising additional questions. The surveillance is already terminated. I made that call before I dialed your number. I appreciate that. The files, Stone said. They stay buried. As long as we have no further reason to discuss them. One more silence. Mr. Cole. The voice had changed again, down to something almost private, almost human. For what it's worth, I didn't know about your wife. Derek shouldn't have said what he said. Marcus looked at Lily's guitar book on the table, at the chord diagrams, at the coffee going cold at his elbow. No, he said. He shouldn't have. He ended the call. He sat at the table for a while without moving. Then he picked up the phone and called Harrow. He called you directly, Harrow said when he picked up. He did. That means he's scared enough to bypass intermediaries. Marcus, that's not a small thing. Raymond Stone does not make personal calls to solve problems. He made this one. Did you get what you needed? Yes. Marcus leaned back in his chair. Thank you, James, for the call this morning. For all of it. Don't thank me yet, Harrow said. Men like Stone keep agreements when the cost of breaking them is higher than the cost of keeping them. Right now, that math works in your favor. But situations change. I know. You should think about whether Fort Aldridge is still the right place for you and Lily. I've been thinking about it. And I'm not going to let him chase me out of my own life, Marcus said. Not again. Harrow was quiet for a moment. The again is new. Yeah, Marcus said. I've been thinking about that too. He hung up. He made a fresh cup of coffee. He sat with the quiet of the house and the strange, unsteady feeling of a crisis that had moved from acute to managed, not resolved, not finished, but pulled back from the edge, which was sometimes the best available outcome, and which required its own kind of processing. He had promised Lily he would pick her up at the regular time. He had 2 hours. He used them to do 3 things. He updated the documentation he kept on an encrypted drive, making a complete record of the Stone conversation with timestamps. He sent a brief, coded message to the 3 separate locations where the file redundancies existed, confirming the current status as non-activation. And then he sat on the back porch with his coffee and let himself be still. He'd earned 10 minutes of still. Lily came out of school that afternoon, pulling her backpack up on both shoulders, the way she did when she was thinking hard about something. She got in the truck, buckled her seatbelt, and said, without preamble, Emily Kowalski says her uncle says that the janitor at our base got suspended. Marcus pulled out of the parking lot. He said. Is that you? It was. Was. I got it sorted. Lily turned to look at him. How? Carefully. She studied him for a moment with those dark eyes. Are we okay? Yeah, Bug. He kept his eyes on the road. We're okay. And the man? Which man? The captain, the one with the coffee. Marcus thought about how to answer that. He thought about Derek Stone, who was 28 years old and had grown up in the shadow of a man so large and powerful that he'd never had to develop any internal architecture of his own, who had learned that consequence was something that happened to other people, who had, in the corridor of Fort Aldridge, with a styrofoam cup in his hand, done something small and cruel to an 8-year-old girl because it could. He's going to have to think about some things, Marcus said. Lily appeared to find this sufficient. She reached into her backpack and produced the library guitar book, which she had brought to school, apparently as reading material. Dad, she said, opening it. Did you know that the first electric guitar was invented in 1931? I did not know that. It was called the frying pan. She held up the book so he could see the photo, though he was driving and could only glance at it. Because of the shape. Makes sense. I want to learn the G chord first. Miss Patterson says G is the foundation of like half of all songs ever written. Miss Patterson knows her music theory. She knows everything, Lily said, with complete sincerity. She went back to the book. Marcus drove. He listened to his daughter read aloud occasionally facts about the history of the guitar. He watched the road and the mirrors and the ordinary late-afternoon traffic of Western Virginia, and he let himself feel the particular quality of relief that is not the absence of danger, but the knowledge that the people you love are okay right now, in this moment, which is the only guarantee that has ever existed. It was enough. He was back on base Monday morning. Gerald met him at the door to the maintenance wing with the look of a man who has witnessed something he doesn't fully understand and has decided, wisely, not to ask too many questions about it. "Suspension's been reversed," Gerald said. "Got the paperwork this morning. Review is closed." He paused. "It's listed as administratively resolved, which is a category I've never seen before in 14 years of processing HR documents. But here we are." "Here we are," Marcus agreed. "Carol Ennis says hello." Gerald handed him his badge. "She also says, and I'm quoting here, 'Tell him he should have come to me in week 1. She's probably right. Gerald looked at him for a moment. "You're really not going to tell me what happened, are you?" "Nope." Gerald shook his head slowly, with the specific expression of a man accepting something he can't change. "Go mop something," he said. Marcus clipped his badge, picked up his supplies, and started his rounds. It was a Tuesday-Thursday corridor day, which meant E-Wing, which meant the third-floor bathroom that had started this whole sequence 3 weeks ago. He cleaned it with his usual thoroughness, working from the back forward, replacing the paper supplies, checking the fixtures. It took 22 minutes. He was coming out with his bucket when he turned the corner and stopped. Captain Derek Stone was standing in the corridor. He was in civilian clothes, which was unusual for this time of day. No cap, no performance in his posture, none of the habitual width in his stance. He looked, Marcus thought, younger without all of that. He looked like what he actually was, a man in his late 20s who had made a series of bad decisions and was standing at the edge of whatever came next. They looked at each other. "I heard you were back," Stone said. "This morning," Marcus said. Stone's jaw worked for a second. He looked at the wall, then back at Marcus. He was clearly going through a version of this conversation in his head that was not matching the live version. "My father," he started. "We don't need to go through that," Marcus said. "I want to—" "Captain." Marcus set down the bucket. He looked at Stone directly, without coldness, without heat, with the same complete stillness that had unsettled Stone in every encounter before. "I don't need an explanation. I don't need an apology. I need your word, not your father's arrangement, your word, that you're done." Stone looked at him. "My daughter," Marcus said, "is 8 years old. She is the only thing in my life that I will not compromise on. Not once, not in any direction, not for any reason." He paused. "You want to talk about your father's pressure on you, his expectations, the weight of his name? I can hear that another time, another context. I'm not without sympathy for that situation. But this moment, right now, I need your word." A silence. Then Derek Stone did something Marcus hadn't seen him do in any of their previous encounters. He looked down. "You have it," he said, quietly, without the usual architecture of performance around it. Marcus studied him for a moment. He had spent years reading men in high-pressure moments, and what he saw on Stone's face was something he recognized. Not the capitulation of a man who has been outmaneuvered, but the particular uncomfortable quality of a person who has, for possibly the first time, been seen clearly, and found the experience disorienting. "Thank you," Marcus said. He picked up his bucket and walked past Stone to the next section of corridor. He didn't look back. Behind him he heard Stone's footsteps, hesitating for a moment, then moving away toward the stairwell, getting smaller, getting gone. Marcus turned the corner and kept working. 3 days later, a small cardboard box appeared on Gerald's desk, addressed to Marcus. No return name. A Fort Aldridge postmark. Inside was a gift card to the music store in town, the only one within 40 miles, with a value that would cover a decent beginner's guitar and a few months of lessons. No note. Marcus looked at it for a long time. Gerald, who had been watching him from the doorway, said, "You going to tell me what that is?" "A guitar fund," Marcus said. "For who?" "My daughter." He turned the card over in his hands. "She wants to learn how to make sad things sound good." Gerald looked at him for a moment. "That's a hell of a thing for a kid to want." "Yeah," Marcus said. "She's a hell of a kid." He put the card in his pocket. He thought about Derek Stone. He thought about Raymond Stone. He thought about the files sitting quietly in their multiple redundant locations, doing what weapons do when they're not being used. Nothing. Which was the best possible thing. He thought about what Harrow had said. Situations change. He knew that. He had always known that. The arrangement with Stone was not a permanent peace. It was a deterrent. And deterrence required maintenance. And maintenance was something Marcus Cole happened to be very good at. But right now, in this moment, it was holding. That was enough. He finished his shift, drove to Lily's school, and when she came running out with her half-unzipped backpack, he reached into his pocket and held up the gift card between 2 fingers. She stopped. She looked at it. "Is that—" "Guitar fund," he said. She stared at him, then at the card, then back at him. Her whole face was doing something complicated and bright, the way faces do when something hoped for arrives without warning. "Dad," she said. "Don't make it weird," he said. She grabbed the card and the hug simultaneously, which meant he got both at once. A small, fierce 8-year-old with a library book in her backpack, and her mother's eyes, and her whole enormous future still ahead of her, pressed against his chest in the parking lot of an elementary school in Western Virginia on a Thursday afternoon. He held on. He let himself hold on for exactly as long as it took to remember what he was doing all of this for. Then he set her gently back and said, "G chord first," and she laughed, and they got in the truck, and he drove them home. The guitar arrived on a Saturday. Marcus drove Lily to the music store on the edge of town, a place called Hendricks & Sons that had been there since 1974 and smelled like wood polish and old sheet music and the particular kind of hope that lives in rooms full of instruments. The man behind the counter was somewhere in his 60s, with thick glasses and the unhurried manner of someone who had spent decades watching people fall in love with things that took years to learn. He set 3 beginner guitars on the counter without being asked, 2 acoustics, and the 3/4 size that was right for Lily's reach, and let her hold each one without rushing her toward a decision. Lily held the 3rd one for a long time. "This one," she said. "Why that one?" Marcus asked. She thought about it seriously. "It feels like it already knows some songs." The old man behind the counter smiled. "That's how you know," he said, and started writing up the receipt. Marcus paid with the gift card and the remainder in cash, and they drove home with the guitar in its soft case in the back seat, and Lily spent the entire drive reading the chord chart that came with it, her lips moving silently as she memorized finger positions. He watched her in the rearview mirror. He thought, "This is it. This is the whole thing. This right here." He had spent 9 years being Phoenix 9, the last call, the clean solution, the man who arrived after every other option had been exhausted and left without a name. He had been good at it. He had believed, for a long time, that being good at something was reason enough to keep doing it, that excellence was its own justification. Sarah had been the one to show him otherwise. Not in a single conversation, not in a confrontation. Sarah wasn't built for confrontations. She had done it the way water changes stone, gradually, consistently, over years, until one day Marcus had looked at himself in the mirror after a debrief and seen a man he didn't fully recognize, and understood with sudden complete clarity that he had been choosing the wrong thing for a long time. He had resigned 3 weeks later, and now he was in a truck in Western Virginia, watching his 8-year-old daughter learn a G chord from a paper chart. And the man who had tried to take this from him had backed down, and the files were quiet in their encrypted locations. And the only call he had to make tonight was whether to order pizza or cook. He ordered pizza. Lily played the same 3 notes approximately 40 times during dinner. He didn't ask her to stop. The 2 weeks passed. They passed the way good weeks pass, without incident, without drama, with the ordinary accumulating weight of small things that are actually large things. Lily's first full chord transition, which she accomplished on a Tuesday night and celebrated by doing a lap around the kitchen. A conversation with Gerald about whether the break room needed a new coffee maker, which it did. A slow Friday afternoon when the base was quiet, and Marcus worked his way through the C-wing corridors with the radio on low and felt, for the first time in a long while, genuinely unguarded. He didn't see Stone, the captain, during those 2 weeks. He heard, through the particular informal network that exists on every military installation, that Derek had requested a transfer to a posting in the Pacific Northwest. The request had been approved unusually fast, which told Marcus that Raymond Stone had decided the cleanest solution to his son's presence on this base was distance. He didn't know whether that was an act of parenting or damage control. Probably both. He thought about Derek Stone more than he expected to. Not with anger. The anger, such as it was, had never been what he thought it was. It had been something more like grief, the way most things were, underneath. A young man who had grown up with enormous power and no accountability, who had learned to use his father's name as a shield and a weapon simultaneously, who had walked into a corridor with a styrofoam cup and casually hurt an 8-year-old girl, because the idea that there could be consequences had never been made real to him before. Marcus had made it real. He didn't feel good about that exactly. He felt something more complicated. The muted, unresolved feeling of having done what was necessary without being able to call it clean. There was no version of those 2 weeks that was clean. There was only the version where Lily was safe, and he was still employed, and Raymond Stone's files stayed buried, and everyone went on living their lives. He could work with that version. He had worked with harder ones. Harrow called on a Sunday morning in late November, when the trees had gone bare and the yard needed raking, and Lily was at the kitchen table, writing a report on horses for school. "How are you?" Harrow asked. Just that. No operational preamble, no intelligence framing. "Good," Marcus said. He stepped out onto the back porch, pulled the door mostly closed behind him. "Actually good." "Lily?" "She's writing a report on horses. She's been writing it for 3 days. I think it's become a lifestyle." Harrow laughed, a real laugh, short and genuine, the kind Marcus had only heard from him a handful of times. "She sounds like her mother." Marcus was quiet for a moment. The yard was cold and still. A few leaves skittered across the patchy grass. "Yeah," he said. "She does." "I'm calling because I want to tell you something," Harrow said. and his voice had shifted just slightly, the way it did when he was being precise. Raymond Stone submitted his retirement paperwork last Monday, effective end of January. The announcement won't be public for another few weeks, but I wanted you to know. Marcus absorbed this. He's not being forced out, Harrow continued. It's clean. He gets his honors, his ceremony, his pension. Everything he earned over 22 years. A pause. The things he did during that 18-month window will never see a public courtroom. I want to be honest with you about that. I know. Does that bother you? Marcus thought about it carefully, the way he thought about everything carefully. He thought about the names in those files, about operations that had gone wrong in ways that never made the news, about a foreign national sitting in a cell somewhere whose name he still remembered. He carried those things. He would carry them for the rest of his life. And that was the correct and appropriate consequence of having been the man who was sent to resolve situations that didn't have clean resolutions. But he also thought about Lily at the kitchen table with her horse report. He thought about what it would mean to tear open everything those files contained. The investigations, the hearings, the years of exposure. His own name surfacing in documents that were supposed to not exist. The secure life he had built dissolving in the heat of something he couldn't control once it was released. It's not a perfect outcome, he said finally. But it's the one where my daughter finishes her homework and goes to sleep in her own bed tonight. Yes, Harrow said. That's the one. Then no, it doesn't bother me enough to change anything. Harrow was quiet for a moment. I want to tell you something else, and I want you to hear it the way it's intended. All right. I've known a lot of men in my career who did what you did. Tier 1 work, off-book operations, the kind of service that never gets a ceremony. Most of them, when they finally got out, when they tried to build something afterward, they couldn't hold it. The weight of what they'd done was too much. Or the skills they had made the quiet life feel too small. Or they simply didn't know how to be something other than what they'd been trained to be. He paused. You held it, Marcus. You held it when it cost you everything. And you held it when someone tried to take it from you. And you held it without becoming something your daughter would need to be protected from. The yard was very still. I don't know that I deserve, Marcus started. It's not about what you deserve, Harrow said, and his voice was the voice of a 71-year-old man who had seen enough to know the difference between sentiment and truth. It's about what you chose. Every day, for 3 years, under pressure and in grief and in the complete absence of recognition, you chose her. That's not a small thing. I've seen decorated men fail to do smaller things. Marcus didn't say anything for a long moment. Thank you, James, he said finally. Stay in touch, Harrow said. Not operationally, just stay in touch. I will. He hung up. He stood on the back porch for a while in the cold, hands in his pockets. He could hear Lily inside. The occasional sound of pages turning, the small scratch of her pencil. He could hear, faintly, the 3 notes she'd been practicing. She did it unconsciously sometimes, when she was thinking, her fingers finding the chord positions on whatever surface was in front of her. The kitchen table, her knee, the arm of the couch. He'd started noticing it a week ago, and hadn't told her. He liked having something to notice. He went back inside. Lily looked up from her report. Who was that? A friend. The calling you James back friend? He paused. You heard that? I have good ears. She returned to her paper, unconcerned. Is he nice? Marcus thought about James Harrow, about the call 3 years ago, the quiet activation of a contact he'd never expected to use. The particular kind of man who spent a career doing hard things and retained somehow his integrity through all of it. Yeah, he said. He's a good man. Okay. She wrote something on her paper. Dad, how do you spell thoroughbred? He spelled it for her. She wrote it down. He sat across the table and watched her work. December came in cold and fast. The base was doing its annual holiday routine. Garland on the main gate, a collection drive for families in the county, a ceremony for the units rotating out in January. Marcus worked his shifts, kept his corridors clean, had coffee with Gerald on Tuesday mornings, and every Friday afternoon drove to the school and listened to whatever had happened at recess. On the second Friday of December, Lily played him her first full song. It was 3 chords, G, C, D, arranged in a sequence she'd found in the guitar book and practiced for 9 straight days without telling him she was working on something specific. She sat on the edge of her bed with a guitar across her lap, her tongue pressed between her teeth the way it was when she was concentrating, and she played the whole thing from beginning to end without stopping. It was rough. The transitions between chords were slow, and the tone was uneven, and one string buzzed on the C that she hadn't quite pressed hard enough. It was completely, entirely imperfect. Marcus sat on the floor with his back against the wall, and when she finished, he didn't say anything for a moment. Well, she said. Again, he said. She grinned and played it again. It was still rough. The string still buzzed. The transitions were a fraction smoother. When she finished the second time, she looked at him. What's the name of the song? I don't know, she said. I haven't decided yet. Take your time with that. She set the guitar carefully against the nightstand, the way he'd taught her, gently, with attention, like something worth keeping. Dad? Yeah? I've been thinking about Mom. He kept his expression steady. What about her? I've been thinking about whether she would have liked the guitar. Lily pulled her rabbit into her lap. I think she would have. She liked things that were kind of sad but also beautiful. Marcus looked at his daughter. He thought about Sarah, who had worn yellow because it was the color of something worth keeping, who had looked at him with eyes exactly like their daughter's, who had spent her last months telling him, not in words, but in every possible other way, that the life they'd built together was not a consolation prize for the life he'd left behind, but the real thing, the actual thing, the only thing that had ever fully counted. He had believed her then. He believed her now. Yeah, he said. She would have loved it. Lily nodded, satisfied. I'm going to name the song after her. What are you going to call it? She thought about it seriously, the way she thought about important things. Yellow, she said. Marcus was quiet. Is that okay? She asked. He pressed the back of his hand against his mouth for just a second, just 1 second. Then he lowered it. That's perfect, he said. On the last day of the year, Marcus drove to a pull-off on a county road 12 miles from base, got out of the truck, and stood in the cold with a folded piece of paper in his hand. It was a printed copy of the first page of the Stone Files. Not the whole thing. The whole thing lived where it always had, in its encrypted, redundant locations, patient and still. Just the first page, printed as a symbol, because Marcus had never been a man given to ceremony, but understood, on some level, that certain things needed to be marked. He'd thought about what Harrow said, about what it meant to hold something without being crushed by it, about what it meant to spend years being the man sent to clean up the worst decisions of people who would never be held accountable, and to carry that, and to still be standing. He hadn't resolved the accounting. He didn't think he ever fully would. There were names in those files that deserved more than a Cold War silence and a general's comfortable retirement. There were things he had done in the service of men like Raymond Stone that he would carry to the end of his life without resolution. That was the truth, and he had learned not to dress it up. But he had also built something real. He had built a home and a routine, and a daughter who could play 3 chords and had named her first song after her mother. He had proven, not to anyone who would record it, not to anyone who would give him recognition for it, that the most dangerous thing he had ever done in his life was not any operation in any country whose name he couldn't say out loud. It was this: staying, being present, choosing every single day the quiet life over the capable one. He folded the paper once more and put it in his pocket. He didn't burn it. He didn't need the drama. He just stood there in the cold for a minute, looking at the bare trees and the gray winter sky, and let himself feel the full weight of everything that had happened in this strange, hard, clarifying year. And then he let the weight settle. Not go away, just settle. The way things settle when you stop fighting them and start carrying them properly. He got back in the truck. He drove home. Lily was on the couch with the guitar and the rabbit and a glass of chocolate milk, working through the chord transitions with the focused patience she'd been building all these weeks. She looked up when he came in. "Where'd you go?" "Needed some air." She looked at him in that way she had, the reading beneath the skin look. "You okay?" "Yeah, Bug." He hung up his jacket. "Really okay." She held his gaze for a moment, checking, the way she'd learned to check, not with worry exactly, but with that particular attention that said, "I see you, and I'm paying attention, and you can tell me." It was his own habit, reflected back at him by a child who had learned it from watching him do it to her for 8 years. He had taught her that without meaning to. He was glad. "Play the song," he said. She smiled and settled the guitar and started from the beginning. G chord, a little slow. C chord, the string buzzing just slightly, her tongue between her teeth. D chord, resolving clean. 3 chords, rough and real and entirely hers. Marcus Cole sat down in the chair across from his daughter and listened to her play Yellow. And outside the window, the year turned cold and dark and quiet. And inside the house, there was light and sound, and the smell of chocolate milk and wood polish, and everything that had ever been worth protecting. He had never fired a shot in anger. He had never raised his voice. He had not destroyed the men who came for him. He had simply made the cost of continuing too high to pay, and watched them walk away, and turn back to his life. The world would never know what Phoenix 9 had done in that corridor with a mop and a laptop and a single phone call. No medal, no ceremony, no record that would survive a FOIA request. But Lily knew her first song by heart, and she'd named it after her mother. And she played it again when the first run ended, a little cleaner this time, the buzzing string finally pressing true. That was the whole story. That was all of it. And it was more than enough.